One of the first mistakes people make when dealing with a narcissistic woman is believing that if they simply explain themselves clearly enough, calmly enough, or logically enough, the misunderstanding will disappear. It feels reasonable, almost noble, to try to clarify your intentions. You believe that truth, if spoken patiently, will resolve the conflict. But this assumption is built on a misunderstanding of how the narcissistic mind operates. A narcissistic personality is not searching for mutual understanding. The goal is not clarity. The goal is control. This is a subtle but crucial difference. When you begin explaining yourself, you believe you are participating in a conversation. In reality, you are stepping into a psychological arena where the rules are very different. Every explanation becomes material to be reshaped. Your words can be twisted, reframed, or selectively remembered. What you meant with sincerity may be turned into evidence against you. You might say something simple, even harmless, and suddenly find yourself defending a meaning you never intended. The discussion moves further and further away from truth, yet somehow you are the one left feeling responsible for fixing it. Carl Jung often spoke about the importance of recognizing unconscious patterns in human behavior. The narcissistic dynamic thrives on one such pattern, the endless loop of justification. The more you explain, the more the conversation shifts. A new accusation appears. A new interpretation is introduced. And once again, you are pushed into defending yourself. Slowly, almost invisibly, you are pulled into a cycle where your energy is spent trying to prove your innocence rather than protecting your peace. Over time, this drains your clarity. You begin questioning your own perceptions. You wonder whether you should explain one more time, perhaps in a better way. But this is precisely the trap. The conversation was never meant to end. It was meant to keep you engaged. The moment you understand this dynamic, something powerful becomes possible. You realize that not every accusation deserves an explanation, and not every misunderstanding requires your defense. And sometimes the most intelligent response is the one that refuses the game entirely. After you begin to understand that constant explanation only deepens the trap, the next realization is even more uncomfortable for many people. Silence can be far more powerful than words. This runs against our natural instincts. When someone accuses us unfairly, misunderstands us, or distorts our intentions, we feel a strong urge to respond immediately. We want to correct the narrative. We want the truth to be heard. But within the psychological dynamic of narcissism, every emotional reaction becomes fuel. Anger, frustration, long arguments, and even passionate attempts to defend yourself all serve the same purpose. They keep you engaged in the conflict. And engagement is precisely what maintains the narcissist's sense of control. A narcissistic woman often thrives in environments of emotional turbulence. The conversation becomes less about the issue itself and more about provoking reactions. Each time you react strongly, the dynamic is reinforced. The attention, the emotional intensity, and the constant back and forth create a stage where she remains at the center. This is where silence becomes a strategic form of psychological strength. Silence is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is the refusal to participate in a game designed to exhaust you. When you stop responding to provocations, something unusual happens. The expected pattern breaks. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of withdrawing energy from destructive psychological patterns. When attention and emotion are removed from a toxic dynamic, the structure that sustained it begins to weaken. Silence does exactly this. It denies the narcissistic pattern the emotional reward it depends on. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. You may feel the impulse to explain yourself one more time, to prove your point, to correct the distortion. But as you remain calm and quiet, you begin to notice something important. The conflict cannot continue without your participation. In that moment, you reclaim something that had slowly been slipping away: your emotional autonomy. You are no longer reacting, you are choosing. And sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one you never say out loud. Once you begin to reduce unnecessary explanations and learn the strength of silence, another essential step naturally follows: the establishment of boundaries. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships. Yet, they are absolutely critical when dealing with narcissistic behavior. Without them, the cycle of manipulation continues indefinitely. A narcissistic woman often operates by constantly testing limits. She observes how far she can push, how much she can push, how much she can reinterpret, and how long you will continue to tolerate confusion or disrespect. These tests are rarely obvious at first. They appear as small challenges to your time, your emotional space, or your personal values. But over time, these small tests accumulate, gradually shifting the balance of power in the relationship. Many people attempt to solve this problem by explaining their boundaries in great detail. They offer long justifications, hoping the other person will understand their reasoning and respect their limits. Unfortunately, with a narcissistic personality, excessive explanation often produces the opposite effect. Your reasoning becomes another opportunity for debate, negotiation, or dismissal. Carl Jung frequently spoke about the importance of psychological individuation, the process of becoming firmly rooted in one's own identity and values. Boundaries are a practical expression of that principle. They are not negotiations about who you are. They are declarations of what you will and will not allow in your life. A boundary, when expressed clearly and calmly, does not require a long defense. It is simply a line drawn with quiet confidence. I will not engage in this conversation if it becomes disrespectful. I will not continue this interaction if my words are constantly distorted. Statements like these are not attempts to control the other person. They are commitments to your own self-respect. At first, a narcissistic individual may react strongly to such boundaries. There may be criticism, guilt-tripping, or attempts to provoke you into abandoning your position. But consistency is the key. When boundaries remain steady, the manipulation loses its leverage. Over time, the message becomes unmistakably clear. Access to your energy now requires respect. And when a person finally understands that your limits are real, something shifts. Because self-respect, once firmly established, is very difficult for anyone to control. Once boundaries begin to take shape, another internal shift becomes necessary, one that is perhaps even more difficult than silence or restraint. This is the practice of emotional detachment. Many people misunderstand what detachment truly means. They assume it requires becoming cold, distant, or indifferent to everything. But psychological detachment is not about losing your humanity. It is about refusing to let another person govern your inner state. A narcissistic woman, often relies heavily on emotional reactions. These reactions are not accidental, they are part of a predictable pattern. When she senses frustration, anger, or desperation, she gains a kind of psychological leverage. The stronger your reaction, the more influence she has over the direction of the interaction. In many ways, emotional intensity becomes a currency in the relationship. This is why arguments with narcissistic personalities often feel strangely circular. The topic may change repeatedly, yet the emotional tension remains high. The goal is not resolution. The goal is engagement, keeping you emotionally invested in a conflict that never truly ends. Carl Jung often emphasized the importance of observing one's own psychological responses. He believed that awareness of our emotional patterns is the first step toward freedom from them. When you begin to observe rather than react, something subtle but powerful occurs. You step out of the role that the dynamic has assigned to you. Emotional detachment allows you to witness behavior without immediately absorbing it. An accusation no longer automatically triggers defense. A provocation no longer demands retaliation. Instead, you begin to see the behavior for what it is, a pattern repeating itself, seeking the familiar response that once sustained it. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires patience and self-awareness. There will be moments when the old impulse to react returns. But each time you pause, breathe, and choose not to engage emotionally, you strengthen a new internal position. Gradually, the psychological atmosphere changes. What once felt overwhelming begins to lose its grip. The drama that once consumed your energy starts to appear strangely predictable, even transparent. And in that clarity, you discover a profound truth. The moment you stop reacting emotionally is the moment their control begins to disappear as you begin practicing silence, setting firm boundaries, and developing emotional detachment. Another realization naturally emerges. Words alone rarely change the dynamic with a narcissistic personality. In fact, words are often the very tools that become distorted in the interaction. This is why a deeper form of communication becomes necessary, one that relies less on explanation and more on consistent action. A narcissistic woman is often highly skilled at navigating conversations. She may reinterpret your words, challenge your intentions, or shift the focus in subtle ways that leave you constantly clarifying what you meant. Over time, discussions become exhausting, not because the issue is complex, but because the conversation itself never reaches stable ground. Each statement becomes another doorway into confusion. Carl Jung often emphasized that the unconscious mind pays far more attention to patterns of behavior than to declarations of intention. What people consistently do reveals far more than what they claim to believe. In this sense, actions carry a psychological authority that words cannot easily imitate. When you begin aligning your behavior with your boundaries, something important changes. Instead of saying repeatedly that you will not tolerate disrespect, you calmly disengage the moment disrespect appears. Instead of explaining again and again that you need space, you simply create that space through your choices. The message is delivered not through argument, but through pattern. At first, this can be unsettling for someone who is used to controlling conversations. They may attempt to pull you back into verbal debates, provoke emotional responses, or question your intentions. But actions have a quiet consistency that is difficult to manipulate. They do not require defense, and they do not invite endless reinterpretation. Over time, your behavior establishes a new psychological reality. The dynamic that once revolved around endless discussion begins to shift towards observable consequences. Respect brings continued interaction. Disrespect brings distance. In this way, your life becomes the message. Your actions speak with a clarity that explanations never achieved. And eventually, one simple truth becomes undeniable. When your behavior aligns with your self-respect, you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. As these patterns become clearer, silence instead of endless explanation, boundaries instead of negotiation, emotional detachment instead of reaction, and actions instead of arguments, you eventually arrive at the most difficult realization of all. Sometimes the healthiest response is not to correct the relationship, but to leave the dynamic behind entirely. For many people, this is the step they resist the longest. There is often a deep hope that with enough patience, enough understanding, or enough personal growth, the relationship will transform. This hope is understandable. Human beings are naturally inclined to preserve connection, even when the connection becomes painful. But there is an important psychological truth that must be faced with honesty. A relationship cannot become healthy if only one person is willing to change. When one individual consistently manipulates, distorts, or disregards boundaries, the dynamic eventually reaches a point where maintaining it requires the continuous sacrifice of your own psychological well-being. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the necessity of confronting reality as it truly is, not as we wish it to be. This requires a certain kind of courage, the courage to recognize when a situation no longer supports your growth. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is the willingness to step away from what repeatedly diminishes you. Alking away does not always mean dramatic confrontation or hostility. Often it is a quiet decision, a gradual withdrawal of energy, less explanation, less emotional investment, less participation in the patterns that once consumed so much of your attention. For a narcissistic personality, this loss of control can be deeply unsettling. The arguments no longer continue. The arguments no longer continue. The emotional reactions disappear. The influence they once held begins to dissolve. What once felt like a game they could always win suddenly has no opponent. But the true purpose of walking away is not to defeat someone else. It is to reclaim your own psychological space. Your time, your energy, and your peace of mind are no longer spent maintaining a cycle that never truly changes. And in that quiet distance, a powerful realization begins to take shape. The moment you choose your peace over the need to be understood is the moment you finally set yourself free.